Starting a trucking company sounds really simple until the paperwork hits and you realize how many freaking decisions you have to make. Like, do I need a US DOT number? What about an MC number? How about IRP? How about IFTA? Drivers tend to get overwhelmed in the process and they make some common mistakes like applying for their authority too early or applying for the wrong authority. The simple truth is that a small mistake early on in this process can cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars later on down the road. That's why in this episode, we're going to cover what you need, what you don't need, so that you start your company the right way from the very beginning.
I'm Chris. This is my 7th year owning a trucking company and hosting the Haulin Assets podcast. When I first started, I thought I knew trucking. Turns out I had no idea how much I would learn. Welcome back to Haulin Assets 2.0, where I take you through the good and the bad, the ups and the downs of being an owner-operator.
Indeed, welcome everybody. Welcome to episode number 192 of the Haulin Assets podcast. This is Take 2, everybody. All right, Chris. Well, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Craig. Over there, he's Chris. How's it going?
Good. How you doing, Craig?
Well, you know.
You've had better days.
We had some technical difficulties, and by technical difficulties, what I mean is Craig was a bit of a dumbass, and we have to re-record this episode, which is what we're doing now. So no worries. But Chris, this is a little bit different episode because you're not carrying your iPad with you. What gives?
Well, I just kind of the circumstances. I had we're talking about paperwork today, I guess. And so I because of things I had going on, it was more convenient for me to actually go old school and print the episode out so I could write my notes and make my changes on the paper rather than electronically. So here we are.
I can think of no.
Maybe that's the problem. Is I used the paper instead of my iPad, and that just kind of screwed the whole system up and
we were
caused the audio problem.
Counting on those interference waves. Yeah, absolutely. No, there's don't run away, dear listener, dear viewer. Yes, we are talking paperwork, but this is the kind of conversation where is paperwork as fun as some of the other aspects of what you're going to be doing as a trucker? No, it's not. But it's at least as vital, if not more so, than many of the other things you'll learn about. So we are going to be talking about DOT numbers, MC authority, all sorts of stuff along those lines in episode number 192. I'll just remind everybody really quickly to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes. And there's something else that we're going to be mentioning a lot throughout this episode, and that is motorcarrierhq.com. Okay, so you've heard us talk about this a lot. But this is one of those episodes where it's like, Chris, you've essentially built a whole company around this stuff and helping people navigate this. And so, yeah, we are going to reference that.
And we try not to be salesy in this podcast, and that's not the intent. But the truth is that Motor Carrier HQ helps out a lot with this stuff. Like, that's what we do. And so it's just naturally, we're going to talk a little bit about where Motor Carrier HQ can step in and help out with some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. And before we really jump into the subject, I kind of want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. We're talking about getting DOT numbers, MC numbers, kind of that startup phase of a trucking company. And I'm going to talk about it a lot in generalities and situations that's going to cover probably 80% of the normal process for people. But the reality is everybody's situation is quite different. And so you really, what works for one person in a situation is not going to work for another person. And you really need to build more of a custom plan for each individual. And so although we're going to give you a lot of information, what you really need to do is talk to one of the business coaches at Motor Carrier HQ. The phone calls are completely free. This consultation is completely free. Whether you want to start tomorrow or you want to start 2 years down the road, it's going to help you get a better plan and understanding of exactly what you need for your situation. So that's a critical aspect of it is make sure, you talk to somebody at Motor Carrier HQ, one of the business coaches, and they'll tailor it to your needs.
Good. Okay, so this conversation then will be the superstructure around which you're going to have to individualize your own and plan for all of that.
What I talk about is probably going to be a 80 to 90% solution for you. But those little tweaks and changes that are going to be different for you than they are for somebody else, that you're going to need to get through like a business coach.
Okay, perfect. So let's get into it then, Chris. Why wait? Why not dive into the exciting stuff, the meat of the episode right away? Paperwork. All right. DOT numbers and MC numbers, these are kind of the biggest elephants in the room, right? Okay, when do I need it? Why do I need it? That sort of thing. Why don't you kick us off with that?
So the biggest kind of trigger of why you need an MC number or a DOT number is you're operating a commercial vehicle. And for that purpose, we're talking about anything that has a gross vehicle weight rating over 10,000 pounds. So if you're 10,000 pounds, you're probably in most situations not going to need anything. But if you're 10,001 pound gross vehicle weight rating, chances are you're going to need at a very minimum a DOT number. The other thing that you really have to take into consideration is that commercial motor vehicle. You have to, if you're using the vehicle for any kind of commercial purpose to make money or as some part of a business, you're going to probably need an MC or DOT number. If you think about it, that 10,000 pound gross vehicle weight rating. If you're driving a pickup, you never hook a trailer up to it, there's a pretty good chance you're probably staying under that 10,000 pounds. But the second you hook almost any kind of trailer onto a pickup truck, that gross vehicle weight rating of that combination of pickup truck and trailer is probably going to be over that 10,000 pounds, triggering the need for at a minimum a DOT number.
Okay, and then there's the commercial aspect, meaning that if you're hooking up a trailer, and if that's a camper trailer to take your family on vacation, no worries. But if you're hauling the monster truck that you're taking to the rally, I don't know, whatever, no. Right? That's your commercial use.
And to kind of expand on that even further, that camper trailer is a good point. If you're pulling the same camper trailer to take your family to a camp out, no need for a DOT number. If you're using that camper trailer pulling your crew to go to the monster truck rally, then you're probably going to need a US DOT number. So same piece of equipment, same setup, two different circumstances. One, you don't need it. The other, you do.
Okay, perfect. And you mentioned that one of the mistakes is applying too early, which is counterintuitive to me. There's a right time or a right window?
Yeah, the timing's important. If you apply too early, you may have to start the whole process over again. It can cause other minor issues. So the timing's important, and a business coach will talk that through with you. Just be honest with them about what your timing is. And like I said, our business coaches, whether you're ready to start tomorrow or 2 years down the road, there's not going to be any pressure. We want to set you up right so that you can be successful. That's what's important.
Okay. So there's a time window there. What other common mistakes when it comes to DOT numbers, MC numbers, kind of these basic things?
Well, so some of them also include applying for the wrong authority. There's several different types of authorities, and there's kind of caveats to each authority that you can kind of click on. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of those common mistakes as we go through, but the wrong type of authority is a really common one. And another thing that happens all the time is somebody thinks they need something, or they apply for multiple authorities, or they get things they don't actually need, and they pay for, that ends up being an expense that's completely unnecessary.
Okay. All right. So the idea here is this is something that's so vital to your business, it can derail you right away if you don't get this done the right way.
Exactly.
Am I laying down the base here?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You want to set up that good foundation, do it right the first time. Again, if you do it wrong, it's going to cost you time and money later on down the road.
Question for you, because you've worked with so many new authorities over the years, navigating all this stuff. If you've seen somebody really, truly screw this up, in some catastrophic way, has it ever sunk a business that you've seen? Or is it more like, yeah, it's going to inconvenience you and you're going to lose money?
It usually doesn't completely sink a business, but it will cause problems, and it can result in fines in some situations. But it really, more than anything, it ends up costing money fixing a problem or delays being able to get the authority activated. And so that's typically what the problems that arise from it.
Okay, perfect. So let's go then from, we're kind of working backwards here, because we're talking about these, the DOT number, the MC authority number, that are vital for your business, but you can't just go apply Mr. John Smith. Like, it's got to be a business that applies for it, right? So there are things that need to happen before you ever get to that point. So what are some of those baseline things that need to be accomplished?
So to point this out, you actually can go apply as Chris Vernon, me being the business, as a what would be referred to as a sole proprietor.
Sure.
But I think you're like idiotic to do that. And the biggest reason is because what a business entity does is it separates you personally from your business. And those become essentially two separate entities. You as a person and the business are completely separate. So if you run into, some kind of problem, say later on down the road, this happens, and I'm not trying to scare people, but it's a reality. You're running down the road, you get in an accident, and you severely hurt or kill somebody. If you apply for your authority under, your name, you personally, Chris Vernon, as a sole proprietor, that means you are liable for everything that happened. You could be sued personally, you could lose your personal assets. So setting up a business structure separates that. And it's the business that is operating separate from the individual. And then if that, under that same scenario, the business is the one that gets sued, and your personal assets, your savings account, your cars, your home, all that stuff is protected under a layer. And so that's why it's critical to set that up. And there's several different business types. We can talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, so you say LLC, but that's more of an umbrella term. There are different types of limited liability corporations. That's the concept you're talking about. This is why we call them LLCs. You're limiting your liability. So yet there are several different types, and depending on where you're hauling, what you're hauling, your company trajectory, there may be some nuance to what you want to choose and why. But I gather that for most owner operators out there, there's usually going to be a correct choice, right?
Typically, so there are different types of limited liability companies depending on what state that you're in. But for 99% of the truck drivers, if you're going to go that limited liability company route, it's just going to be a regular generic limited liability company. The other more common option, but not nearly as common, especially when you're first starting out, is a corporation. So an Inc. versus an LLC. Those are the two most common, but 90% plus of new trucking companies are going to start out as an LLC. Haulin Assets started out as an LLC. We're still an LLC.
Okay. So you know what? Let's not chase that rabbit of when you become a corporation. This would be a great question for a business coach. Yeah. So let's move on then. Now you've got your business entity set up, meaning when we say that, that simply means that legally speaking, the company exists, right?
Yep.
But there is one more thing you have to do. Now the company exists, it needs a way to be trackable by the government. That's through the EIN, right?
Yeah. So specifically the IRS. EIN stands for Employer Identification Number. It's basically like a social security number for your business. And just like the IRS uses your social security number to track you, the EIN is what they use to track a business. And when you apply for that, what you're doing also, at some point you need to designate how you want to be taxed and how you want the IRS to view you. So you apply for that EIN number, and depending on how many people are members of your LLC or your corporation, it's going to default to one setting. And that default setting will work for some people, but it won't work for others. So at that point, at some point early on in your business, you're going to need to figure out how you want to be taxed, how you want to be recognized by the IRS. Because an LLC can be recognized by the IRS as, here are a few examples: a partnership, a sole proprietorship, an S corporation. Those are probably the more common ones. And an Inc. or a business can be recognized also as a partnership also as an S corporation or a C corporation. You have all these designations, and that's where a tax professional is going to kind of steer you in the right direction of what makes the most sense for you and your situation.
Okay, perfect. So now we've got the business set up, we've got the EIN going, we've applied at the right time for the right numbers, right? All right, what's our next step? What do we want to get into? Do we want to dig into some of the DOT and MC stuff?
Yeah, I feel like we've probably already covered the DOT number. So just a review a little bit. If you're starting a trucking company and you're over that 10,000 pounds, you're probably going to need at a minimum a DOT number. And that's really kind of how the government, for safety purposes on the highway, really tracks your business. So the FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, that's what they use to track you.
And this is what you're using. If I'm in Utah, which I am, and I'm hauling onions from the north part of the state down to the south part of the state, and that's my only route, I might be able to get away with just that DOT number. But the second I cross state lines, things change, right?
That's the big change right there. For most people, if you're crossing state lines and you're for hire, that's the other kind of big designation. So for hire means you're hauling somebody else's product or somebody else's equipment. Somebody's hiring you to move something from point A to point B that crosses state lines. You're going to probably need an MC number.
Okay, excellent. Any other considerations there?
There are several, and this is where a business coach can help you out. Like, for example, one of the other situations where you still might need an MC number is if you're hauling hazmat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, man, I hope that's not too common. That terrifies me, Chris. Have you ever hauled hazmat?
No, we haven't.
No? Okay. Would you? Or is it too expensive to then go out and get the necessary?
Well, it's not as common in a reefer trailer, which all our trailers are reefer, but there are situations where you could. To haul hazmat, you have to go, the driver themselves has to go through a whole bunch of particulars. And actually, I think we have hauled hazmat once or twice, now that I think about it. But it's really uncommon in a reefer unit.
Now, before we move on from this, I'm guessing that we're kind of, like you said at the top of the episode, we're giving people a general overview of this, but there are going to be nuances. I'm sure there are more bullet points, if I know government documentation, there's a lot of fine print to go through. So there's more nuance that people need to be aware of and can use these business coaches for. Tax professionals, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So with that said, where do we want to go to next? There are, on my note sheet here, Chris, I see, I'm counting, 8,500 different acronyms.
Yeah.
Because this is government stuff.
The government loves to use acronyms. Yeah, maybe not quite that many in my notes, but I do have a bunch of acronyms. So let's kind of just brush through those really quick. One thing that I kind of want to point out, so we talked about that 10,001 pound kind of benchmark.
Right, the threshold.
Another very common one in the trucking industry is 26,000 pounds. If you stay under, 26,000 pounds or under, there's a lot of things you don't have to do, but as soon as you get over that, so 26,001 pound, that's going to trigger a lot of other things. And one of those things is IFTA, which stands for International Fuel Tax Agreement. And it's basically what makes it so that trucking companies pay their fair share of fuel tax in every state they travel through. You and I in our cars, when we pay for fuel tax, we just pay it at the pump. Every time we pump a gallon of fuel, a certain portion of that goes to the state that you pump the fuel in. And for a personal vehicle, that works really well, but commercial vehicles, it can travel really long distances and over multiple states, but only fuel in one state, it causes problems. So IFTA reconciles all that between the different states. You have to file it once a quarter. That's another area that Motor Carrier HQ helps out with. Okay,
and yeah, this is one of those areas that I was kind of joking about at the beginning of the episode. This is the less sexy, less fun part of trucking, but yeah, you got to do this quarterly. Yeah. Some of these things are happening, they should be happening kind of constantly. throughout the life of your business. Okay, so we've got IFTA. By the way, there will be a quiz, okay? So everybody pay attention. No, there's no quiz. But IFTA, the International Fuel Trade Agreement.
Tax agreement.
Tax agreement. Got it. Chris, you're killing me here. Next one I see is IRP. What is that?
That stands for International Registration Plan. If you notice on semi-trucks and trailers, a lot of the times the license plate is going to say apportioned on it. And basically what that means, it's a similar type situation with IFTA. If based in Utah, and that example that you had where you're driving just between 2 points in Utah, you're just going to get, as a commercial vehicle, a commercial license plate that's based in Utah, and you're paying Utah's registration fees. Well, as soon as if you're crossing state lines, every state wants a piece of their registration fee. And that's where this IRP plan comes out of. The states all got together and figure out how to do this. But basically what it means is, we'll use an example. If you're traveling between Utah and Nevada, and those are the only two states you operate out of, and let's say you drive 75% of your miles in Utah and 25% of your miles in Nevada, what's going to end up happening is you're going to pay 75% of Utah's registration fee and 25% of Nevada's registration fee. So, you can just think, you can expand that. If somebody's operating in 48 states, you're paying a certain percentage of each of those states' registration fees. So, it kind of sounds like it may get really, really expensive, but it's not, because you may be paying 1% of Maine's registration fee. Right. So, Maine's piece of the pie is really small and not very expensive, but you're gonna typically pay $1,500 and up a year for a semi-truck's apportioned registration. Depending on how much you operate in each state, that can vary, because Arizona's registration fee a year is way more expensive than Utah's.
Interesting. Okay. So this is you said it's an international agreement. Is that to take care of Canadian provinces and Mexican states?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So let's see. UCR is the next one I see coming up here, Chris. UCR, what's that?
Unified Carrier Registration. That's just a fee every trucking company, every brokerage in the United States has to pay every year. It's really not very expensive, and it's actually just used for educational purposes, so that each state gets a piece of it, and they get to use that money to educate the general populace about how to drive and behave around semi-trucks.
Okay.
So for example, Utah, every high school class in Utah, a semi-truck comes to if they're taking driver's education through the school system, they come to that class, and a team of Utah employees comes with the semi-truck and shows, teenage drivers that are just learning how to drive, where the blind spots are of the truck, how to stay safe and drive around the truck, not to hang out in that blind spot, and not to cut them off, that kind of stuff.
Right. It's there's a tragic story out of my high school years, actually, around that. So I guess I don't have any objection to that fee if it's going to help educate kids and others about that stuff. Now, the next one I see, I believe it said BOC3. I much prefer Bach 3. It kind of sounds a little like Mach 3 or something, like the Air Force. That is
maybe
over.
A little bit cooler.
Bach 3.
A cool person obviously did not start that.
Bach 3 could also be a really great action film out of Bollywood or something. All right, so what's Bach 3?
BOC3 is basically, if you have an MC number, you have to file a BOC3, which is a company that will then represent you in essentially every state in the country. So, if you're, like we are based out of Utah and we get an accident in Connecticut, there's a place in Connecticut that legal documents can be served to you as a company that will eventually get back to you. That's basically what a BOC3 is.
Okay.
Your Bach 3.
How does that work in practical terms? Do you know what your situation is in every state?
So you essentially buy the BOC3 service from a company, they file it for you, and that company has reps in every state. And so then when it gets served, they know there's an address that they can go serve it to, and then the company you registered it with will get it back to you.
Okay. I doubt, Chris, that we're done with acronyms, but let's take a break for a minute, take a little breather, and move on to driver requirements. Okay, so this has all been about your company per se, but now it's about you as a driver or anybody that you might hire, right? But let's stick with owner-operator for now. So you as the driver have requirements here. Let's dig into those.
Yeah, so most of these additional requirements are going to trigger at that 26,001 pound and over mark. If you hit that, you're going to need a CDL. You're also going to need be part of a drug and alcohol program. What that means is every commercial truck driver in the country has to be part of a random drug testing pool. And they have to be part of this pool and subject to random drug tests. So there's no way to get around it. Larger companies will administer that pool all by themselves, but smaller companies will typically use a third-party administrator like Motor Carrier HQ. Motor Carrier HQ has a random drug testing pool that you can sign up for. We'll take care of that. If you are a single owner operator, you're required to be in a pool that's administered by a third party. You cannot handle it by yourself. And in reality, if you've got 20 or fewer drivers, it usually doesn't make sense for you to handle it yourself. It's typically over that when they start handling it themselves.
Okay. And at this point, we should maybe back up and say, yeah, we're throwing a ton of info at people. This is a bit of a fire hose of knowledge. Not all of this is going to be applicable in every situation. I think this is the third time we've mentioned this in the episode. It sounds incredibly complex, really convoluted, but A, maybe not everything here applies to you. And B, even if it does, there's a lot of stuff out there, tools, people, companies that have built up around navigating all this. So you don't have to figure it all out on your own.
Yeah. Don't go it alone. It'll cause you so much frustration.
Okay, excellent. Let's do the next. If paperwork is exciting, Chris, you know what's more exciting? Insurance. Yeah. Everybody loves talking about insurance. But this is another pretty vital concept here. Let's dig in. Insurance
is a vital concept. And the reality is, it may sound like it's simple, but it's really one of the first big things that people tend to trip over is getting insurance for a couple of reasons. One, it can be harder than you would think. Trucking insurance is more complicated. There's, a lot of issues with trucking insurance. But two, it tends to be one of those bigger expenses that you have to come up with a little bit bigger chunk of money right from the very beginning. And we'll talk about how much that could be in a second. First, I want to kind of get into one of the more common mistakes that people make when they're applying for their authority. And that is the minimum requirement for insurance for a trucking company is $750,000. And when you get your insurance, your insurance carrier is going to post filings with the FMCSA that shows you've purchased at least that minimum $750,000. It's raining.
It's raining hard.
Down.
Well, let's hope we can cut the rain out of the audio here. That should be fine. So this is, because it's with the FMCSA, this is legible. This is public info, right? And so your insurance coverage, because anybody can see it, it can be used to judge whether you are allowed to haul certain loads, right?
Yeah.
And as I understand it, you can be on a load board and find not many loads at 750,000, right, that are going to require more.
Yeah, so typically you're not going to see that on load boards, but what tends to happen is, so if you purchase just the $750,000 policy, as far as the government's concerned, you're good to go.
Right.
The problem rises in brokers. Most brokers, to haul loads for them, are going to require $1 million policy.
So it's not the shippers, it's not the receivers, it's the brokers.
The brokers and the shippers, sometimes the shippers. The receivers typically don't care, but
right.
the shippers and the brokers are going to say, hey, we want you to have $1 million policy.
Okay, all right.
But here's where some of there's some nuances with this, and this is where people get tripped up. When you apply for your authority, the default is $750. And if your insurance, when you go and you may have bought $1 million policy, but when your insurance goes to post the filings and they see that the $750,000 is what the FMCSA requires, they're going to look at it and say, hey, we're just going to post 750, even though you've purchased $1 million policy. And then that's when you're going to run into some serious issues with brokers. So there's some tweaks you can do on the actual application of applying for your authority that will make it so that it will show that the FMCSA's requirement is $1 million, so that you don't run into that problem, and your filings online that everybody can see are going to show $1 million. But it's not intuitive how you do that. That's where it kind of takes somebody like Motor Carrier HQ to kind of walk your hand through this process, make sure that that's what you need, and then apply for it the right way. That's probably, if not the most common mistake that we end up correcting. It's definitely one of them. And the reality is, it takes us more time and labor and costs more money to fix the problem than it does just to apply for the entire authority right the first time.
Okay. All right. Now, the other thing to consider with insurance, if we look back at the rest of the conversation so far, there's all these acronyms. There's, oh my gosh, I got to get this number and I need to make sure I'm registered here and there and everywhere. But all together, most of the stuff we've talked about here is not, it's not make or break expensive necessarily. Insurance, you want to get this right because it can be a significant cost for your company, right?
Yeah, it can be huge. It can cost you anywhere from $10,000 a year upwards of $30,000 a year. And there's a lot of things that kind of impact where in that range you fall. One of the big ones is actually what state you're based out of. If you're based out of especially Southern Florida, your insurance rates are going to be super high versus, in the middle of Nebraska. So that's going to make a huge difference. And then another thing that makes a big difference is experience.
Experience as in your time behind the wheel?
That's a part of it. So a lot of the insurance carriers are going to require you to have had a CDL for 2 years before they will even look at you. If you don't have that 2-year mark, you're not even qualified. If you remember back when I started the Haulin Assets and I drove for that first year, I didn't have a CDL. I just gotten it. It was brand new. There are a few companies under certain circumstances that will allow that to happen, but your pool of available carriers is small. That means you're probably going to pay a little bit more money in that kind of a situation.
Okay. Yeah. What other? Let's see. Freight type is going to affect that as well.
Freight type definitely makes a bit. I forgot a little bit with experience. Experience also is going to be like how clean your driving record is.
Oh, sure.
And how well you've done there. All that impacts it. You're going to the type of freight you haul. If you're hauling, empty plastic containers that are super cheap, your cargo insurance isn't going to be super expensive. But if you're hauling, a $500,000 excavator, that's going to have a big impact on your insurance. So, yeah, the equipment that you haul, the product that you haul is going to have an impact there.
Okay, so be prepared when you get to this stage in starting your owner-operator business. This is going to be your first big shock. There's been a lot of complexity up till now, but this is the sticker shock portion where you go, I got to pay how much? How often? My gosh. So insurance, yeah, pretty important to get this right. One
more thing I want to talk about that can impact your insurance rates that I want people to really take into consideration, and it's your equipment. You take, for example, if you buy a $50,000 used semi, it's going to cost you a lot less in insurance than if you purchase a brand new $200,000 semi. In fact, it's probably going to cost you pretty close to 4 times. The physical damage piece of the insurance is going to cost you roughly 4 times the amount of a $50,000 truck versus a $200,000 truck.
Okay.
So that's an advantage when you're first starting out to purchasing a used truck, is it's going to be less expensive insurance-wise.
Yeah, it's easy to think, I'll get the new truck because then I won't have to pay as much in maintenance and repairs and whatnot. It'll be more reliable down the road. And that's true. I mean, all things being equal, that's going to be true. But the trade-off here is, you paid less in maintenance, but you paid a lot more in insurance. So, factor that in, I suppose. All right, Chris, let's talk about now, after you've applied for all these things, what do we want to get into? Timelines? What happens after you apply?
Yeah. So when you first apply and we hit submit button on that application, if you're getting just a DOT number, that DOT number is going to be active. If you're getting a DOT number and an MC number, the DOT still is going to be active right away. But that MC number, the operating authority, is going to take, there's a 21-day vetting period. There's no way to get around it. You are doing that 21-day vetting period. And so during that time, you're going to, get all your insurance figured out. You're going to do everything. And the timing on when you post your insurance filing is important. If you post too early, you're going to be paying for insurance that you're not using. If you post too late, it's going to delay your authority getting activated. So that's where, again, Motor Carrier HQ business coaches will walk you through that timeline. And so then at that point, it just kind of becomes that waiting game, waiting for that 21-day vetting period to happen. Another thing that I want you to take into account and think about, and this is super annoying, the second we hit submit, guess where that application, guess what it is?
It goes into a lead-lined, very secure box, like Indiana Jones style. It's in a warehouse that the government keeps intensely secret. Right?
You're a little bit off.
Oh, okay.
It's public information.
Oh.
So what ends up happening is, as soon as we hit submit button, that public information, it goes out there, and literally within 30 seconds, you're going to start getting inundated with phone calls. And I'm not exaggerating with this. It could be 30 to 50 phone calls in the first 24 hours. And so, some of those phone calls are going to be for legitimate companies that can offer good, legitimate services. But a super high percentage of them are snakes in the grass that are just out there to take advantage of you, either by scaring you into paying something for something you don't need, or way overcharging you for something that you do need. And so again, Motor Carrier HQ can kind of help you sift through that. In fact, we in most situations just tell people to kind of ignore those phone calls for the first little while, because the likelihood of getting tripped up on something that is going to cost them money they don't need is so high, it's just not even worth it. It's not. It's a waste of your time.
And if you have a business coach like Motor Carrier HQ who can help you out through this, then you don't need somebody cold calling you to educate you on what you need. You have somebody. Yeah. And so if there are additional things that you're going to need down the road, you don't worry about somebody selling you on a cold call.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about compliance issues with all of this. As we hopefully have impressed on people so far, this is important stuff, and it can hurt you financially. It suck up your time, suck up your money, but there are compliance issues that can shut you down, right?
Absolutely. So for instance, if you don't have a DOT number and you need one, or you don't have an MC number and you need one, you get stopped at a port, you're going to be placed out of service immediately, and that truck's not going anywhere. Which, if you're hauling something at that point, then you've got a load that you've got to figure out what to do with, which may mean you're paying somebody else to haul it, just crazy fees because it's last minute, it's an emergency. That's where a simple mistake can cost you thousands of dollars. Like it can become a real true headache. So you want to make sure you've got your ducks in a row, you've got all the licensing and requirements that you need, you're in compliance with things. If not, it can cause you some serious headaches later down the road.
And there could be some of those like immediate consequences like that, but then there's the new entrant audit that you went through, excuse me, in your first year. But you don't know when that's going to happen because it's sometime in the first year, as I recall. Am I right? So, sorry, go ahead.
The requirement is that sometime in the first 12 months, the first year, either the FMCSA itself or one of their state partners is going to conduct a new entrant audit on your business. And this may sound intimidating, and it's really not meant to be. The FMCSA intends this to be as much an educational piece as it is an actual true audit. So they're going to ask for your documents. They're going to ask for your driver qualification files. So a lot of times an owner operator thinks, hey, I'm the driver, I'm the owner, I don't need an application for employment. But the reality is that's part of the driver qualification file. You still have to fill one out. As an owner operator, you still have to do a pre-employment drug test. You still have to meet all those requirements. Most of the things in that new entrant audit that they're going to ask for, if there are issues with them, they're going to mostly educate. But if you're egregious and you just don't even show that you're trying, that's when things can really get bad, especially if it's something related to like drug and alcohol. If you don't have a drug and alcohol program, you haven't been doing that could cause you some serious problems, even potentially shut you down right away until you get it fixed. But for the most part, most of those things, if they're smaller issues, they're going to educate you, require you to fix it, and then you just kind of be on your merry way. But the easier thing is just to get it all taken care of from the very beginning. Motor Carrier HQ has a pretty simple package that can help you pass that new entrant audit super easy. You follow that and it becomes a breeze. And it's really not hard to put everything together. It just takes a little bit of time.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's start the process of wrapping this up. I want to ask you about what people can do during this time. So you want to start your brand new authority. You've applied for all the numbers and now you're in your 21-day waiting period, et cetera, et cetera. There's all this stuff going on. What are you as a business owner doing to be productive during this time? What's going on during that 21 days? A
lot of it's just like the government, hurry up and wait. But the biggest thing that I recommend you make sure you're staying on top of is that insurance piece. That again is something that kind of has a tendency to trip people up. So make sure you're applying for your insurance. You're going to 2 or 3 different insurance agencies to try to get several different quotes. If you do that, you don't need to go out to 10, go out to 3, I think is kind of a perfect number. And at that point, you should get access to most of the truck markets that are out there. So good to go that way. Okay, perfect. Chris, any other thoughts that you want to make sure that we hit before we finish up for today? The only thing I want to reiterate is this is really setting up the foundation for your company. And so you want to make sure you're doing it right, so you're set on solid ground. You're not running into either issues that are going to cost you time through delays or money later on down the road. And then also remind people, this isn't the first time we've talked about this subject. We talked about it in episode 3, right at the very beginning, and we probably went into it in a little bit more detail at that point. So it wouldn't hurt to listen to this episode a time or two and listen to episode 3 a time or two. You do that, you're going to have a much better understanding of what you need to do. And then also, of course, talk to a business coach at Motor Carrier HQ, and they will help you figure out those nuances that are particular to your situation. And of course, if you listen to this episode, you listen to it again, and then you go to sleep in the back of the truck, right? I want you to go to Spotify or wherever you're listening to this, hit that repeat button and then just mute it. So we get all those sweet download numbers too. Yeah. Right? And you get something that's going to, your brain's just going to absorb it all night long, and you're going to wake up smarter in the morning. It's like the quit smoking cassette tapes back in the 90s. Hopefully I used my savory voice today. All right, so wrapping this up, reminder, HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes. Haulin Assets Academy for the entrepreneurial out there who want to self-educate. There's some courses there. Chris, I went back and looked last week, and you guys, I think, dropped the prices, and you've got some combinations that people can do. It is genuinely, economically foolish almost not to do Haulin Assets Academy. So make sure you check that out. And then lastly, yes, we've said it 100 times already, but motorcarrierhq.com is where you can find a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about today. So Chris, thanks for coming in. Yep, we'll see you next time.